Greetings, brothers and sisters. So, I was going to include a part about villains. In fact, it was the original idea for the video I made yesterday. I was making the video about canceling the Queen. That was an extra piece that I added to it and ended up becoming its own important video. I'm going to revisit that in a third video. But in terms of villains and the need for villains in our modern day stories, our internal worlds, our internal narration, let's start here. This is the 2012 opening ceremony to the London Olympics.
Mr. Baldwin, Your Majesty.
So that's the Queen and Daniel Craig, who's James Bond, right? Or was James Bond in 2012.
Good evening, Mr. Bond.
It's the Queen, somebody who owns, I believe, is it like 18% of the world's land? Owner of 18% of the world's real estate. And so they get into a helicopter and the Queen jumps out with James Bond. There she is, opening a parachute. They're about to go into the Olympic ceremony here. The British flag is their, they're going into the Coliseum. And she comes into the stadium. She parachutes into the stadium. And she comes into the applause of the people, her subjects, right? A standing ovation for the Queen. And about 11 minutes later, there are these kids sleeping in, bunk beds in like some orphanage or something.
With boring distances between one adventure and the next, it's nicely...
That's J.K. Rowling reading Peter Pan. And here comes all these little demons.
With the table and chairs, it's not a bit frightening. But in the 2 minutes before you go to sleep, it is real.
They're playing the theme song from Halloween. So they have all these villains here, these prominent villains in British literature for children. And you can see that this child is being pulled upwards towards Voldemort, right? And the fascination with these villains, Cruella de Vil, 101 Dalmatians. Of course, Cruella is now a hero, something that I'll talk about later. But they have all these villains that they're celebrating. They're giving them a prominent spot here in the opening ceremony of the Olympics. And so if you think about our internal makeup being based in stories, right? We have these stories that are, our movies, our TV shows, literature, books, and things like this, which make up our internal world. Stories are so important to the internal development of people and to create a lens in which to view the world. In our childhood stories, certainly, we have all of these villains, right, that are given to you when you read books, and then, of course, TV shows, all these childhood villains that are significant, that in many cases cause children stress, right? And they have this reference point, a villainous reference point. As a child specifically, and people in general, we learn a lot through imitation and observation. We learn how to be people by watching other people, especially as children. And so children have a strong reference point at how to be a villain, right? Like every child knows, has been shown over and over again, how to be a villain and how to have a villainous evil sort of attitude, how to be a bad person. Inside of us, there is this reference point to these various villains, right? Villains are a huge part of everybody's internal makeup because of movies and TV shows and the emphasis on villains and evil. And the villainous characters are often far more developed than the hero. The hero is often boring and sort of bland, but the villains are often the best roles and the best part. They're the parts that actors like to play because the villain's much more complex, much more compelling. And so think about that. The stories are often more about the villains than they are about the heroes, right? that the villain is the, creator of the action. The villain is the more developed character. The villain is the centerpiece of the story. You see this with Trump, where Trump is considered this great villain, right? Certainly by one half of the population. And he dominated the media. He still is. Dominating the left media, dominating Hollywood, dominating all of these things. Because our culture is more focused on evil, more focused on the villain, than they are focused on good. The hero is, has a very simple role to play in ultimately defeating the villain, but the villain is the centerpiece of the story. Without the villain, the story would be boring. It would be not even a movie. The villain is the dominant personality in the show, in the movie, in the story, or whatever it is. And you often see where the hero becomes obsessed with the villain, becomes obsessed with killing the villain, with destroying the villain, thinking about the villain all the time, neglects his family, his responsibilities, his duties. You see this in life. People need a villain. And so the way this has played out in our lives, in our world, well, for example, being American. So I was born in 1964. This was during the Vietnam War. My brother went to Vietnam when I was 2. And then communism was the villain. In the 50s, right, in the 40s and the 20s to the 40s, Germany was the villain, the country of Germany, in 2 world wars. But immediately after World War II, the Russians became the villain of America, right? We had a collective villain, and we had our, we have civil villains, we have villains within, domestic villains. But in terms of America as an entity, Russia and communism became the villain. And it appeared in movies, right? There'd be all these movies, anti-communist movies, movies where the Russians were doing bad things. The Russian was the villain in a James Bond movie or a Arnold Schwarzenegger or Sylvester Stallone movie. But eventually the wall fell in Berlin, and then radical Islamic terrorists became the villain in movies. So all of a sudden the movies were different. The villains were no longer the Russians, right? The villains were now Islamic terrorists, and then there were certain events that happened in real life, in terms of crossing over from the theatrical to real life events or real world events. And now you see a change to domestic, sort of the idea of domestic terrorists or domestic evildoers who are the villains, more and more in TV shows. But you see that there's always this villain, right? There's always this sort of divide and conquer type of situation. Because in America right now, if you belong to one demographic or another, whatever you identify as, there's going to be villains for you, right? So if you're a right-wing person, it's going to be the Democrats, it's going to be Hollywood, it's, you're going to be a QB, it's going to be a specific group of people, Hillary Clinton, Jeffrey Epstein, whoever it is, right? You have your villains, people who are Trump supporters, and there's an obsession with seeing justice done, right? This is where the Q movement took off, these unsealed indictments that were supposed to come down against Soros and Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton and all these people. And there was this obsession with the villains. On the left, Trump is the villain. If you're a left-leaning Hollywood type person, Trump was the big villain, right? There's other people that were behind Trump or with Trump, but Trump was the catch-all for so many different groups and demographics. If you belong to various, demographics that are seen as being victimized by Trump, then Trump is your villain. And so much energy and effort went into being obsessed with Trump. Look at how much the left and the people that think Trump is the villain are obsessed with him, even now. And now that Trump's gone, it's like the after effects of Trump. Now the QBs are villains, right, for the left. And pretty much, everyone who's listening to this, if you're in the so-called truth community, you probably have a villain, people that you really dislike. And you might, follow them on Twitter, right? You might troll them, you might harass them, or whatever you might do as a way to react. And you're waiting for them to get their just desserts. Because, there's this obsession with villainy and villains. And, I don't have that, right? Maybe if you've noticed this when I make videos, I don't have that. Like, there's people I dislike. The thing I dislike most about is that I have to cover them, or because I don't want to spend time with them. I don't want to connect with them. I don't want to connect with their energy. But I certainly don't hate them, and they're not responsible for my dissatisfaction. None of these people really affect me, because these politicians and powerful people aren't making their own decisions. They have handlers, and even their handlers are being, I don't want to say played, but they're being controlled in a way by God. They're doing divine work, because the system has to come down, right? We have a system that's demonic, and we've created it collectively, and we're dependent on it. I mean, that's what I say over and over again, and there's nothing we can do about it. We can't save the system. We can only prepare ourselves and our children for the collapse of the system and building something better, right? Creating something better by connecting to God on a deeper level to, undo the mistakes of the past, or plot a new course away from where we were going, right? Because we're going in the wrong direction. We're obsessed materially and we're disconnected spiritually. I have faith that, there's a plan, right? God has a plan. You believe in God, you believe in a plan, and that everything's accounted for. And that, what's really important here is improving oneself, right? In terms of becoming what God wants you to become, right? You have a purpose, we all have a purpose, and we all have our full potential, our maximized potential, a pure reflection of who we are as a soul. And if you really think about it, because many people will watch, say, The Bachelor, or I don't know, Big Brother, I don't know what these reality TV shows, or fictional movies and TV shows, and there'll be a villain on, and the people will hate the villain on those shows, right? Hate the villain. Talk about the villain all the time. Think about the villain. Fictional villains in movies and TV shows and things. I mean, people have this in a movie where you viscerally hate the villain, right? Like the villain or some character in the show, and it's not even a real person. And this is really the way it is in all life, because if you're hating on Biden, or you're hating on Trump or the Queen or whoever it is, right? You're the one who feels the hate. The hate is inside of you, and hate doesn't feel good. Jealousy and bitterness and anger and fear, all these things, they don't feel good. And when you're obsessed and thinking about the villain all the time, and villain is such a big part of our culture, where almost everybody has somebody they don't like, or maybe it's somebody at work, or maybe it's your spouse, or somebody in your family, and you're just obsessed with it, right? And they're taking you down all the time, and you're making the people around you feel miserable because you're angry and hostile all the time, right? Think about how you affect the people around you with your condition, because this is when you're in the heartfulness meditation, you're always supposed to take account of your internal condition. And when you get sittings, the way the heartfulness meditation works is a trainer or the master of the system transmits to a group of people, or in an individual sitting transmits to a person. This divine energy comes through them, and they get a sense of the person. You either feel something or you see something in the person's etheric, their heart, their etheric heart, and it's an obstruction that needs to be cleaned away. And you get a sense of someone's spiritual condition. And, if you're feeling hate all the time and angry, and you're bitter, and you hate your job, and you're miserable, and you're depressed, your internal condition is going to be heavy. When you're around other people, they're going to feel that, right? They're going to feel the heaviness. You have people in your life that as soon as you're around them, you want to run, right? You can just feel the heaviness. And when they leave, you're like, oh my God, you breathe it's like your lungs expand, you take in air, and you're like kind of suffocating. People are draining your energy. And so this is spiritual condition. And so one of the reasons why they have people obsessed with enemies is because if you were thinking about God, you would be reaching a higher level of your potential. Instead of, focused on some external enemy, if you were focused on God inside yourself, your heart would be expanding, and you would be growing and evolving as a soul and as a person. You would be expanding into a higher level consciousness. But what they do is they keep you grounded to some externalized enemy. You know, it's the government, it's this, it's that, right? It's this person, it's, you know, all these people that are oppressing you and you're being victimized by them. And you're feeling bad inside. The saying, being resentful is like swallowing poison and expecting your enemy to die. Your enemy's enjoying their life. You have all these celebrities or wherever they are, right? People who are living their lives filled with anger and, you know, whatever, bitterness, whatever feelings you have inside. And it's stifling your spiritual growth and keeping you bound to a low level of consciousness and vibration. And so that's why there's this focus on enemies and darkness and evil, also training you to be a bad person, to embrace these types of qualities that you see over and over again, exemplified by these villains that dominate the movies, TV shows, and the big show, the news, right, media, and all these things. And so it behooves everyone to, like, not do that, right? Like, who cares? Like, you don't really care about these people. They don't really affect you. And if you have people in your personal life, you either work things out or you do something differently, right? If you have a situation where you're miserable all the time, either fix the situation or, you know, change your situation, right? Fix the dynamics, the social dynamics, work things out with the people in your life, or change your life in some way so that you're not focused on all the negativity all the time. And I mean, that's what's bringing down the world right now, is the negativity. And most people are, you know, bathing in it, wallowing in it. That's why I say only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely reporting for the Apocalypse and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.